This is part 3 of my video series on buying a 10 to 15-year-old Mercedes-Benz. In this video, I want to cover some of the tools, equipment, and knowledge that you'll need to be able to successfully work on these cars yourself. Remember in video part 1, I talked about, are these cars worth it? In part 2, I addressed the question, are these really DIY cars? And all of this kind of runs together. If you follow me here, I believe they're worth it, but there's a caveat, and that is if you do some of the work yourself. I think you'll become very discouraged if you buy one of these cars and you have problems and keep having to take it in to get it repaired professionally. There are a lot of things you can do on these cars yourself. They're not as mysterious as some would lead you to believe. You know, the old era of, oh man, these are computer cars, I just can't work on them. Well, I don't think that's totally true. So right now, I'm just going to briefly cover some of the things that may be a little different. Let's say you've worked on the old 123, 126, or 124 chassis before, and you've been contemplating moving up to one of these newer Mercedes, and you're where a lot of people are like, well, I don't know, these are kind of complicated, and I don't know if I can work on these myself. And there are a few things that are different, and there are some things that are going to be more challenging, so you may have to push yourself a little bit. So I want to start by just showing you some of the basic things that will be a little different when you start working on these cars, quite a bit different, in fact, from working on the older ones that you may already be familiar with. I want to begin here in this section by talking about tools. Now, if you have a good set of metric tools and you've worked on the older Mercedes before, you're in good shape. I mean, you're going to use most of those tools on these newer models. But there is one thing that is different, and it's quite different. As soon as you remove the engine cover, you're going to start looking at the fasteners around the engine, and you're going to realize they're Torx. Gone are a lot of the old 10 millimeter, 13 millimeter, and 17 millimeter head bolts that we're so familiar with. And many of them, particularly on the engine, they have been replaced by Torx and e-torque bolts. So if you don't have a good set of Torx sockets, that's one of the first things I recommend that you go out and obtain. And get a complete set that goes up into some of the larger sizes of the Torx, and it must contain a good selection of the e-Torx sockets. That's for the female socket. You can see here how they fit over the head of those Torx bolts. And along with that, you'll want a good selection of screwdrivers. I prefer a good selection of Torx bits like this, long ones. The short ones, they can be kind of difficult, especially if you use power tools. I like to use power screwdrivers. I even have an electric ratchet. And these can be very handy, particularly with the long bit like you see here, the Torx bit. And you can get into tight places. And with this trigger action on this power drill, a lot of the trim screws and the screws that don't have high torque can be removed with this type of electric tool. And check out some of the new electric ratchets on the market today. In later videos, I'll be showing you some of these tools as I use them to do major engine work. But you know, the days of those old, weak electric ratchets that didn't last very long, the charges would last maybe 10 minutes, they're kind of going away. And a lot of these new electric tools have some real kick to them. They're never going to perform like an air tool. But remember, those air tools, they make a lot of noise, and you have to drag that hose all over the place. So many applications, you see a lot of mechanics today converting to electric power tools. So that's something you might want to add to your toolbox as well. Now, there are some special tools that may be required when you go to work on these. You know, for instance, trying to get the spark plug boots off. There's a couple of special tools that you may want to get when you do a spark plug change on these newer engines. There are specialty tools for other aspects, and they're usually when you get into more major maintenance, and I'll go over some of those tools in future videos. If you're interested in any of these special tools and want to see what we carry, you can go to my website and just type special tools in the search box, and it's going to take you to what we offer. Now that we've talked about some of the basic tools, and not many as you can see here, let's move on to equipment. And by equipment, I'm going to primarily mean electrical equipment. Now for the fun part. I'm going to be so bold as to say if you're going to own one of these cars, you must go out and get a code reader. There's different types. There's simple code readers like you see here. Here you see a more advanced code reader scan tool that can give you more diagnostic information, or you can even get software to hook up to your PC to get the codes and do the diagnostics on your own car. Without a code reader, you're going to be stuck. You're going to be stuck to having to take it to the dealer or take it to a mechanic to get them to read the codes, to get them to give you the information, to get them to clear the codes and reset your check engine light. This is something you can do yourself. I'm not saying everything that the code reader will bring up you'll be able to fix yourself, but at least if you have to take it into a mechanic to have him repair, you're going to know what's wrong with it. And the other thing is, when you go out to buy one of these cars, you should have a code reader with you and check for any error codes that are hiding in the computer on the car that you're looking at to buy. It could be really interesting to find out what's hiding in there. So I know this is a huge subject. There's a lot of information to learn on this. It's not difficult. I mean, it's really not difficult. If you can use a cell phone, you can use a code reader, and it's certainly easier to use than most of these TV remotes that you have to deal with today. So I'm currently working on a complete video workshop series. This will be on demand on my website, which will go through the basics of understanding OBD code readers and scan tools, how to plug them in, how to read the codes, how to take the code and then get the information that you need to find out what the code is trying to tell you, and finally, what type of repairs you'll have to do on the car in order to clear the codes and be on your way. So that's not going to happen right away. This is something I'm working on, will be available over the next 3 or 4 months on my website. Now let's talk about knowledge, because that's a big topic. When discussing the 3 aspects of tools, equipment, and knowledge, I believe that knowledge is the most important. Let me explain why. Okay, let's say you want to get one of these cars, and you really don't want to do the maintenance. Maybe a little bit of it. Maybe you'll do your oil changes, but you don't have the time or the energy to go do spark plug changes and a bunch of other maintenance. And you think, well, okay, if I get a good enough car, maybe that'll minimize the potential for having to take it into repair. If you go in and just tell somebody to fix your car, I can almost guarantee you're going to be very disappointed. I believe that knowledge is the absolute best defense against being sold unnecessary repairs on a car. It doesn't have to be Mercedes. I'm talking about any car. People don't want to get knowledge. It's too much work. So, okay, then pay. You have a choice. There's no free lunch out there. And particularly in owning these newer 10 to 15-year-old Mercedes-Benz, there certainly isn't a free lunch. I mean, the cars are cheap, but you have to be ready for potential problems because they are old and they have mileage on them and things wear out. So knowledge becomes the very best defense. It can also help you learn to fix the car yourself. Now, where do you get knowledge? Oh, there's a couple places you can get knowledge. Number one, you can learn everything by yourself, on your own. But that takes a long time, and it's usually fraught with pain. That's the type of thing where, okay, I'm just going to pull this engine apart and learn how to fix it on my own. I don't like to read manuals, I can fix it. Well, that is a good way to learn, but there's really a better way to learn, and that's learn from other people. Learn from other people's mistakes, learn from what other people have experienced on their own how to fix an issue. So there's a lot of different sources of information out there, and I want to just touch briefly on them in this segment of the video. Right away, gone are the days of those good old printed manuals that we came to love with the old chassis in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and early 90s. They've been replaced by CD manuals that you have to read on the computer. And I know those aren't always the easiest to read, but I highly recommend that you get the Mercedes factory CD repair manual set when you finally end up getting one of these cars. I know sometimes it's not the easiest to read. I can remember, for instance, I was trying to read the factory manual on how to repair a tilting sunroof in a late model 126 sedan. And I'm reading this stuff, and I'm reading it once. I'm reading it twice, and then I'm looking over at my wife, Linda, and I said, Linda, I don't understand what they're talking about. I'm a college graduate and I cannot understand what these engineers are trying to say. So, I feel your pain. These manuals are sometimes very difficult to understand. In fact, I go back into my own history and I've written a number of repair manuals on the older model Mercedes. And one of the first manuals I wrote was on how to diagnose and repair the vacuum system in these old diesels. Because the first time I bought a 240D, I did an oil change, and after I did an oil change, the transmission wouldn't shift. And I freaked out because I thought, oh no, the transmission is bad. Well, I tried to find information on why my transmission didn't shift properly, and I couldn't find it anywhere. It certainly wasn't in the factory manual. The factory manuals generally don't come from the angle of, hey, I've got this old car that's got a lot of problems and I've got to fix them, because I think some of the people who wrote these manuals, they didn't even know that these problems would exist 10 to 20 years down the road. So that's why I began to write manuals, and it was basically because of my own frustration as to not being able to find the information that I needed to fix my own car. There's no perfect manual out there. I just recently purchased a couple of aftermarket manuals out of England. Now, in the past, I've had little success with Haynes, not so much with Chilton's, but they can be good reference guides. They'll have some information in there that, you get location of parts and so on, but they're not going to give you step-by-step detailed procedures on how to do a specific job in most cases. Well, let me show you an example. I'm convinced that the author of this manual basically is just interested in selling the manual, and I'm going to show you an example. Let's say I need to remove a starter motor. Okay, here's the section 9.2 on starter motor removal. It says, disconnect the battery earth, ground cable. Again, we will try to separate the different models. Read the instructions before you commence with the job. Complicated on some models, period. And then each model, they have 3 sentences to remove and replace the starter, which basically says, get under the car, take the bolts out, take the starter out. Well, what happens when you can't get to the bolts? What happens when you can't even get the starter out because it has to come out at a certain position? So those are the type of frustrations you run into. And then here's an even better example that I just love. And you'll get frustrated when you get these type of books. It says headlamps replacement. As the replacement of the headlamp requires the adjustment of the headlight beams, which should be carried out by a Mercedes dealer or workshop dealing with headlight adjustments, we will not describe the operations for the removal and the installation of the units. Okay, great. I bought this book because I wanted to learn how to take my headlights out. So it's going to be a little challenging. Now, one of my plans in the next couple of years is to come out with a series of video workshops that will take the viewer through the process of doing a number of these jobs, like replacing spark plugs, replacing brakes, replacing shocks, replacing suspension parts, and so on. I guess I'm tired of writing manuals because, you have to sit a long time to write a manual. And I think it's becoming easier as I age to let's just do a video. But some of these videos are very complex, they're very long, and they're not inexpensive for me to produce. So I will have to charge a small fee to be able to watch some of these detailed advanced video workshop series, and that once again, they'll be viewable on my website for a small fee. I just cannot continue to do videos on YouTube because of the expense to produce these, particularly when you want high quality and you want to be able to go step by step through a process of repairing a specific part on the car. I just recently finished a whole series on the tilting sunroof, and that's almost a 3-hour video to take you through the process of removing the roof, taking the tilting arm assemblies apart, finding out where the problems are and replacing them and adjusting it and the motor and so on. And yet you go to the factory manual and you have like 2 pages that cover the sunroof. And most of it won't tell you really how to fix some of the problems that we're seeing today. There's a lot of information on the internet, but once again, I'm going to warn you, don't believe everything you read on the forums. So you have to kind of pick and choose. You can also go to the Mercedes-Benz site, and Mercedes-Benz now is offering some of their technical information online, some of the same information that they supply to the dealers, so you'll want to check that out as well. And then in conclusion, I want to talk about knowledge coming from somebody else. And this is when I'm going to bring up the subject of, okay, what do I do if I can't fix this myself? What if I have a transmission computer failure and it's got to be recoded and I have to take it to the dealer? Or what if there's some really difficult codes like SRS lights coming on and I can't get the information I need, and I may need to take that to an independent mechanic to get that fixed, because they're going to have the software and some of that backup equipment that's just not practical for every DIY to own. So I don't want you to be afraid of this. This is something you may have to budget for when you think about owning one of these cars. But right off the bat, go find the person that you know locally knows a lot about these cars and befriend them. You know, if the dealer can't provide the type of personal service that you're looking for, then look for an independent mechanic. But you want that resource, you want that knowledge, because that's part of the whole knowledge package. It's not possible for you to, or even for me, to know everything about these cars. In some ways, they're very complicated and there's a lot to learn. But you need to start learning. Don't be afraid. Now, get out there and start learning, because knowledge will become your best friend.